Dear people watching and listening, Assalamu alaikum. Kindly like and share this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Kindly support my channel by contributing to my Patreon account so that I can continue making such audiobooks for you. The Muslim Conquest of Persia by Lieutenant General A.I. Akram. This book tells in detail about the Arab conquest of Persia, also known as the Arab conquest of Iran, during the Rashidun Caliphate from 633 to 654 AD. This conquest brought the fall of the Sassanid Empire, which was in power for over 4 centuries, while rivaling its neighbor, the Eastern Roman Empire of Byzantine. Start of Chapter 6. Yazdjurd and Rustam. A large delegation of citizens came to see Rustam. They were openly rebellious and especially resentful of the power struggle that was going on between Rustam and a noble named Firzan. While these two wrestled each other in internal politics, the affairs of Persia were going from bad to worse, and the Suwad was being ravaged by Muslim raiding columns. This was 2 years before the arrival of Saad at Qadisiyah, in the weeks that followed Muthanna's victory over Mihran at Boaib. The delegates did not mince their words. "What are you waiting for?" they asked Rustam. "For our destruction? By God, O you people who are in command, this weakness has come upon us only because of you. You have split the people of Persia and diverted their attention from their enemies. Were not the death of you our own destruction, we would kill you this very hour. But if you do nothing, we shall kill you anyway, and be ourselves destroyed. Then we shall at least be rid of you." This rising discontent had the effect of strengthening the hands of the Emperor Yazdjurd. Firzan somehow disappeared from the political scene, and nothing more was heard of him till after the Battle of Qadisiyah, while Rustam was cut to size, and metaphorically and literally put in his place as the head of the Persian military organization, a post for which his talents eminently qualified him. The emperor, assisted by his satraps and other nobles, put into motion measures to harness the military resources of the empire for its defense. Contingents of Persians, Turks, Kurds, Armenians, and Arabs were called in to join the standard of Persia for a great campaign, and troops marched to Ctesiphon from as far east as Khurasan and as far north as Azerbaijan. A huge cantonment was established at Sabat, 3 miles west of Ctesiphon, and here the mighty army began to assemble under the command of Rustam, who would himself take the field against the Muslims. Along with the concentration and preparation of the field army, steps were taken to reorganize the administration of the empire and restore the faith of the people in the government. Smaller forces were moved into the Suwad to clear it of the invaders, and the Muslim outposts, alarmed by the military movements taking place in Persia, vacated their positions and retired west of the Euphrates. Muthanna moved to Sharaf in Zulqa'dah, 13 Hijri, and deployed his small army along the fringe of the desert in southwestern Iraq. Even in the Uballa sector, the Muslims abandoned their conquests and quickly stepped back into the safety of the friendly desert. With the withdrawal of the Muslims, the inhabitants of the Suwad threw off the burden of allegiance to the Muslim state and reaffirmed their loyalty to the Sasani dynasty, and the Persians took Hira and Najaf and established outposts to watch for further offensive movements by the Muslim army. The domain of Persia was back in Persian hands. The state of affairs lasted about 18 months till the middle of 15 Hijri. During this period, the Persian army was organized, trained and equipped for battle while Yazdjurd awaited the next move of the Muslims. Intelligence about the arrival of the army of Saad at Qadisiyah was brought in by Persian agents, but still Ctesiphon waited, wondering when the Muslims would become bold enough to enter the boundaries of Persia again. And then suddenly a dozen rough Arabs turned up in Ctesiphon, claiming to be the envoys of Islam, and demanded to see the emperor. Saad had selected 12 officers from the army to carry the message of Islam and deliver an ultimatum to the Persian emperor. They were all noble Arabs, chiefs most of them, but not likely to impress the cultured Persians with their simple desert ways. They rode their horses bareback. Among the 12 envoys were Nu'man bin Muqarrin, Mu'anna bin Harisa, Asim bin Amr, and Mughira bin Zurara. But in the true spirit of desert egalitarianism, none of them was the leader or chief envoy. The delegation rode across the Suwad, and since it was on a diplomatic mission, it had no trouble with Persian garrisons and posts on the way. Nearing Sabat, it made a detour of the Persian military camp and entered Ctesiphon. This city, which shared with Constantinople the honor of being the greatest capital of the time, would normally leave any Arabian awestruck, but these Arabs were Muslims and judged honor and quality by different standards. They came not as humble Arabs seeking the favor of the great king, as their ancestors would have done, but as proud Muslims come to offer Islam and deliver an ultimatum to one whom they regarded as an infidel, and therefore an inferior. Outside the gate of the palace the Muslims dismounted, tied their horses and demanded of the guard to be taken to the emperor as envoys of the Muslim power. A large crowd of Persians gathered to stare in amazement at the shaggy, neighing horses and the stern-faced men, hard sons of the desert who looked about them with fierce confidence. Yazdjurd was surprised at the arrival of the Muslims, which was certainly not expected. He hastily convened a conference of nobles and discussed with them various matters relating to the talks, which must now be held with the emissaries of Saad. When the conference was over, he sent for the Muslims and prepared to meet them in the great audience chamber of the palace of the Khusros. The Muslims, roughly attired but armed with dignity, entered the chamber and sat down in a line in front of the emperor. Beside Yazdjurd stood the interpreters who would transmit the words of one party to the other, while behind him were arrayed his nobles and courtiers. For some time there was silence as the Muslims looked calmly at the man who in normal times would be too high to be seen by Arabs. Then Yazdjurd broke the silence. "What brings you here?" he asked. "What compels you to invade our land and fight us? Is it because we have left you in peace that you have grown so bold?" Nu'man bin Muqarrim, who sat in the middle of the Muslim line, said to his comrades, "If you wish, I can speak for all of you, unless another wishes to speak." "You speak," replied his comrades. Then, turning to the emperor, they said, "The words of this man are the words of all of us." "Lo," began Nu'man, addressing the emperor, "Allah has been beneficent to us. He sent us a prophet to guide us towards right and enjoin it upon us, and to show us what was evil and forbid it to us, and to make us seek the good of this world and the next. Not a tribe remained but was split in two, one part following him, and the other shunning him, though only the good entered his faith. So matters remained as long as Allah wished that they should remain. Then he was ordered to act against those of the Arabs who opposed him. This he did, and they entered the faith, all of them, and we knew that what he had brought was better than the enmities and hardships in which we had hitherto existed. Then we were ordered to start with those of the nations which lived close to us and to call them to justice. Now we call you to our faith, a faith which glorifies all good and condemns all evil. If you refuse, then accept a burden which is lighter than the other burden which you must carry. This is the jizya, and if you refuse this also, then there shall be war between us. If you agree to join our faith, we shall leave you with the book of God, by the injunctions of which you must live, and we shall leave you to your land. If you pay the jizya, we shall defend you in return for it, otherwise we shall fight you. Yazdjurd controlled his temper as he replied, I do not know of a people on earth more wretched than you, fewer than you in numbers, and worse than you in discord. We left you to live beyond our borders and we protected you. The Persians did not invade your land, and had they done so, you would have had no hope of standing up to them. If it is hardship that brings you here, we shall send you food according to your needs. We shall honor your leaders, we shall clothe you, and we shall appoint over you a king who will rule benevolently over you. Now another Muslim, Mughira bin Zurara, spoke up. O king, these men are the chiefs of the Arabs, their leaders, their nobles. The noble treat with dignity the noble honor the noble respect the rights of the noble venerate the noble. This was a gentle rebuke to the emperor for not showing more courtesy to the envoys than he had done. It was not intended to, and did not please the Persian monarch. But Mughira continued. You have described our state without having knowledge of it. As for our distressing condition, there was none in worse condition than us. As for our hunger, there was no hunger like ours. We would eat beetles and scorpions and snakes, and regard them as our normal food. Our habitation was the surface of the earth, and we wore whatever we could make of the hair of camels and the wool of sheep. It was our way of life to raid each other and to kill each other. Some of us would bury their daughters alive, so that they would not have to share their food. Thus did we live in days gone by. Then Allah sent us a noble man whose family and whose faith and whose birth were known to us, whose birth was the best of births, whose family was the best of families, whose clan was the best of clans, and who in his own person was the best of us. He called us to his faith, and none answered him except a companion he had, who was to be his successor. And he spoke and we spoke, but he spoke true while we spoke false. He rose while we declined, and whatever he said came to be. Then Allah cast into our hearts truth and obedience to him, and he became our link with the Lord of the worlds. What he said to us was the word of Allah. The orders he gave us were the orders of Allah. He said to us, Your Lord says, Lo, I am Allah, the One. I have no partners. I was when nothing was, when everything was non-existent except my countenance. I created everything, and everything shall return to me. I took you into my mercy and sent you this man to guide you on the path by which you avoid torment after death, and to make you worthy of my home, the home of Islam. We bear witness that he came with the truth from the truth, and as Allah has told us that whoever follows you on this path shall share the good that you possess and bear with you the burdens that you carry. And whoever refuses this, ask him for the jizya, and then defend him against whoever you defend yourself against. But if he refuses this also, then fight him, and I shall decide between you, and those of you who are killed shall enter my paradise, while those of you who survive shall receive the reward of victory. Hence choose as you please, the jizya, and you shall be subservient to us, or the sword, or accept Islam and save your soul. Yazdjurd's anger was rising as Mughira was making his speech. When Mughira stopped, Yazdjurd exploded. Is this how you address me? I address you because you spoke to me, the Muslim countered. If someone else had spoken to me, I would not have addressed you. The emperor was not to be mollified. But for the fact that envoys are not killed, he shouted, I would surely have killed you. I have nothing more of you. He then turned to a court attendant and ordered him to fetch a load of dust. The attendant left the chamber and returned soon after with a basket full of earth. The emperor commanded, place it upon the leader of these people, and drive them forth until they are beyond the gate of Ctesiphon. He next turned to the Muslim envoys. Return to your master. Let him know that I am sending Rustam against you, and he will destroy you in the trench of Qadisiyah, and teach you a bitter lesson which those who come after you will not forget. I shall then send him to invade your land, and visit upon you worse than Sabur had done. The reference was to Sabur of the shoulders, famous among other things, for pulling out the shoulders of all Arabs who fell into his hands. Which of you is the leader? Asked Yazdjurd. There was silence for a while as the Muslims looked at the Lord of Earth. Then Asim bin Amr spoke. I am their leader. I shall carry it. Is that so? Asked the emperor of the envoys. Yes, they replied. The basket was placed by the Persian attendant on the back of Asim's neck. Followed by the others, he carried his burden out of the palace to where their horses were tied. Here the 12 Muslims mounted their horses and set off at a fast pace for Qadisiyah, their hearts bursting with joy. Yazdjurd had much to learn. The Arabs regarded the earth of any land as sacred, not the kind of thing to be dished out to anyone who entered the land with hostile intentions. They certainly did not look upon the emperor's act as humiliating. This was also known to many Persians in Ctesiphon, and soon the capital was buzzing with accounts of the talks and what the emperor had done in the matter of the earth of Persia. Rustam heard these reports and was deeply agitated. He went at once to the capital and asked the emperor how the meeting had gone and how he saw the situation. I did not know, said Yazdjurd, that the Arabs had such people as came to see me, people of intelligence, such eloquence. Then he went on to describe the proceedings of talks between him and the Muslim envoys. Coming to the end of the account, he said, they gave me a challenge which I accept, even if it means my death. But I found the wisest of them also the most foolish. When they asked for the jizya, I gave them dust, and he carried it on his own head, while he could have given it to another to carry. I know not why. O Emperor, remarked Rustam, he was indeed the wisest of them. Angry and distressed, Rustam returned to the camp. He felt that it was imperative to get the fateful basket back from the enemies of the empire, and at once set off a group of horsemen to pursue Muslim envoys and snatch the basket away from them before they could cross the river Atik. He then turned to one of his officers and said, "If our men catch the envoys, our land is safe. If they fail, then God has given away your land and your children." The Persian party set off at a brisk pace across the Suwad, the road to Qadisiyah, but the heavy Persian charger, ideal for the set-piece battle, was no match for the swift Arabian. The Muslims had crossed the Atik bridge to safety long before the Persians arrived, to find that they had failed in their mission. Upon crossing the Atik, Asim galloped about the camp with the basket full of Persian earth, shouting to all he passed, "Give the commander tidings of victory. We have won by the will of Allah." After a while Asim stopped at his tent, where he placed the basket. Then he rode to Saad, gave him an account of the talks with the Persian emperor, and added in conclusion, "We have conquered them. We have subdued their land. Rejoice, for Allah has given us the keys of their kingdom." Back at Sabat, Rustam heard in grim silence the report of the failure of the Persians to catch the Muslim envoys. He was shattered by the news. "The enemy has taken your land without doubt," he muttered. "This is what the son of the hairdresser has done to the country. The enemy has snatched away the keys of the kingdom." The return of the Muslim delegation with the earth of Persia electrified the army of Islam. No finer omen could have been expected or hoped for. Everyone became eager for battle, confident that God had already granted them victory, had already bestowed upon them the land of Persia. But the Persian army had to be drawn out of the security of its cantonments to where the Muslims wished to fight it. In accordance with the strategy already designed by Umar and Saad, and a very fine strategy it was, Saad increased the tempo and range of his raids. Fast mounted columns swept the unprotected area right across the Suwad, and penetrated as far as Heath and even Firaz, which marked the border between Persia and Byzantium. The raiders brought in not only cattle, sheep, and valuables, but even mules and donkeys. A few clashes occurred with Persian troops on these raids, but by and large, the light Muslim cavalry proved too fast and too expert in this sort of warfare to be prevented from doing what it wished to do. This was just as Saad wished. He had caught the Persian by the elbow and was twisting that elbow for all he was worth. He was twisting it until the Persian should find the pain unbearable, and the Persian of the Suwad soon cried out in pain. The raids drove him to madness and to the brink of revolt. Strong delegations of the citizens of the Suwad headed for Ctesiphon and conveyed the same sorry tale and made the same urgent appeal for action. But this time there was a warning in their words, which were as follows: "The Arabs have arrived at Qadisiyah with a posture which is nothing short of war. If they continue doing what they are doing, there will be nothing left for the emperor. They have devastated the land between the two rivers, and only that has survived the raids which could be kept within the safety of forts. If help does not come soon, they, the citizens, would transfer their allegiance to the Muslims." The Persian feudal lords who owned vast estates in the Suwad also suffered heavily and pressed the emperor to send Rustam against the Muslims. And Yazdjurd decided that the time had come for action, that no more delay could be brooked. He sent for Rustam. "I wish to send you for this purpose," he said to Rustam, "for the means employed must be worthy of the end, and you are the man of Persia today. You can see that the people of Persia have suffered in this situation, as they have never suffered since the house of Yazdjurd came to power. I wish to benefit by your knowledge. Describe to me the Arabs and what they have done since they came to Qadisiyah, and describe to me the Persians and what they have suffered at the hands of the Arabs. Rustam's reply was brief and to the point. They are like a wolf who by chance finds the shepherd negligent and does mischief. Rustam had given an allegorical twist to the conversation, and Yazdjurd too could play that game. I do not think that such is the case, he observed. Know from me that the similitude of the Arab and the Persian is thus. An eagle lives on the peak of a mountain. At night a bird steals up to its nest and starts eating the leftover food. When the day dawns, the bird watches the eagle apprehensively, preparing to fly if the eagle should strike. If the eagle appears afraid to attack, the bird stays and snatches its food. But if the eagle rises to attack, the bird drops the food and flies away. Thus it is with the Persians and Arabs. The worst that can happen to us is that some should seek to save themselves at the expense of others, and if there is disunity in our ranks, no one group can rise against the enemy without being annihilated. Let this guide you in your actions. To this Rustam replied, O Emperor, leave the Arabs to me. The Arabs will continue to fear the Persians so long as they have not seriously harmed the Persians. If the empire gains strength through me, it is the will of God. We have learned much about the art and stratagems of war, and it is my view that stratagem is more beneficial than certain kinds of victory in battle. Yazdjurd could guess that Rustam was reluctant to go into a great head-on clash with the Muslims, and asked for more ideas. Rustam went on. In war, patience is better than haste, and today is the day of patience. To fight battle after battle with smaller armies is better than seeking one victory, and this would also be harder on our enemies. Yazdjurd refused to accept this course of action. His youthful and heroic spirit saw visions of a great historical battle, such as had often been fought by his ancestors, and he told Rustam that such a battle would have to be fought. Rustam returned to camp and promptly sent a request to the emperor to accept his resignation and appoint another in his place. The request was turned down. Over the next few days, the pressure mounted on Yazdjurd to do something to save Iraq, and he once again sent instructions to Rustam to march to Qadisiyah and do battle with the Muslims. Again Rustam came to see him and pressed for acceptance of his own strategy. O Emperor, said the general, it is my judgment that leads me to this, and I would not speak of this to you if I did not have to. For the sake of yourself and your family and your empire, let me stay here and send Jalinus with an army to fight them. If he wins, the victory is ours, and if the result is otherwise, I shall send another to fight them. My name is dreaded by the Arabs. I must preserve the image of the undefeated in the minds of the Persians, and the Arabs will remain in awe of me and fear my advance. But if they gain a victory over me, it will embolden them and will mark the end of the days of Persia. Yazdjurd refused to accept this plan, which fell short of his glorious expectation. If you do not march, he declared, I shall march in person against them. The reader might imagine from the foregoing narrative that Rustam was not a brave general, but this would be an oversimplification. Judgments in such military situations are far more complex than would be apparent to the untrained mind. and a few words about the strategical situation might help the reader in grasping the implications of the various courses of action open to the Persians. The Muslims were in an ideal position. Their military aim was to conquer Iraq, and they knew that this could only be done by battle. They were determined to fight the battle at Qadisiyah, with their back to the desert and with the Persians across the Euphrates and the Atik. And the Muslims were in no hurry. With their base in a safe zone, they were striking with fast columns in the Suwad and taking all the supplies that they needed. This, from their point of view, was an ideal war, a war of which the enemies paid the cost. They were sitting pretty as the guests of the Persians, although uninvited and unwelcome, and were living off the Persians. Their life in camp was no worse than their normal habitation in the desert which they called home. In fact, they were enjoying themselves at the expense of their enemy. A delay in battle meant no hardship or loss to the Muslims, but the Persians were hurt badly by a continuation of the prevailing situation. The Suwad was losing its wealth and the people were losing their faith in the imperial leadership. This state of affairs just could not be allowed to continue without a possible breakup of the empire without battle. The raids could not be stopped except by defeating the Muslim force from which they emanated and by the destruction of their base, and this could only be done by fighting a major battle with the Muslims at Qadisiyah, ground of the Muslims' choice. The situation viewed from many angles favored the Muslims. So the Persian Empire cried for battle, and it was justified in doing so. Yet Rustam's strategy of avoiding a major clash was a sound one, and had he been allowed its implementation, it might have led to a better outcome than actually resulted. He was clear-headed enough to know that fighting the Muslims was no easy matter, as had been demonstrated by Khalid and Muthanna. Should the Persians seek battle and lose it, the whole empire would fall, and that would be a much worse consequence than the present suffering of one province. On the other hand, by keeping his large army in being with an offensive posture, Rustam could ensure that only raiders would enter Persian territory. Such a strategical plan has often been adopted in history with, in the long run, beneficial results. But public opinion and political pressure were making it impossible for Rustam to follow his own strategical design, and were forcing battle upon him. And here too, in the operational plan which he conceived, he showed himself to be a strategist rather than a mere tactician. He would use several smaller armies, each fresh in its turn to fight the Muslims, and if none of these succeeded in defeating the invaders, he would lead his large army in person to deliver the final blow. This in essence was the same strategy as he had followed against Abu Ubaid, but it was opposed in concept to Yazdjurd's strategy, which could be described as a big bang strategy, one mighty decisive winner-take-all battle. There was, however, more than strategical concept which robbed Rustam of his desire for battle. As stated in an earlier chapter, he was an astrologer and his study of the stars revealed to him that the Persians would be defeated in battle by the Muslims. Try as he might, he could find no error in his astrological calculations. Moreover, shortly after the return of the Muslim envoys to Qadisiyah, Rustam had a terrible nightmare in which Caliph Umar came and seized the weapons of the Persian soldiers. In these superstitious times, such a dream could only be interpreted in one way, and Rustam saw it in the destruction of the Persian army, and as a consequence, the death of the empire. But Rustam was a royal son of Persia, and prepared to obey the call of the nation, and the orders of the emperor. He dispatched an advance guard under Jalinus towards Qadisiyah with the order: "Advance, but do not get involved without my orders." Next he sent Yazdjurd the message: "If God gives us victory, we shall go to their land and engage them in their homes until they submit." Then he set off with the rest of his army for Qadisiyah. The Persians marched along the main road to Najaf. They made their first long halt at Kusa, a little north of the present Iskandariya. From here Jalinus advanced, crossed the Euphrates, and camped at Najaf, while Rustam went on to Burs near Babylon. At Burs, some Persian soldiers went on a rampage of drinking and rape, which led to bitter protests from the populace. Rustam had several offenders beheaded, and then marched on until he reached the east bank of the Euphrates, at Miltat, northeast of Najaf. The whole army closed up and established a large camp along the east bank from Ghariyin, opposite the present Kufa, to opposite Khawarnak, which lay 3 miles north-northwest of Hira. A few days after his arrival on the east bank, Rustam sent for a delegation of the prominent citizens of Hira. He had not forgiven them for the way they had switched their allegiance to the Muslims whenever the latter occupied Hira and entered the Suwad. When the delegates arrived, he denounced them for what he considered as fickleness and warned them as Christians against having anything to do with the Muslims. The citizens of Hira did not like this, and felt that the accusation was unfair. They turned to one who stood in their midst, a very old and very distinguished-looking man, and asked him to speak for them. Abdul Masih bin Amr bin Buqayla was one of the most illustrious figures in Arab Iraq. He was a prince. Hoary with age, he was known for his wisdom and wit, and was held in reverence by the Iraqis, in whose affairs he wielded considerable influence. He had met Anushirwan the Just shortly before the latter's death, and warned him that after him his empire would decay. He was the man who had negotiated with Khalid the surrender of Hira and earned Khalid's respect. Abdul Masih took a few steps forward and addressed Rustam. "Do not come with your army to us a second time, if you cannot defend us, and will leave us to defend our land ourselves." "O enemy of God," Rustam retorted, "you rejoiced over the invasion of our land by the Arabs. You provided them with information and with food." Then Abdul Masih gave it to him, straight from the shoulder. "You say we rejoiced at their coming? And what were we to do? At what did we rejoice? They came and took us to be like slaves. They were not of our faith and called us people of hell. You say we acted as spies for them. Well, what made us to do so? Your friends ran away and left the land open to them to plunder as they wished. As for our feeding them, we gave them food so that they would not enslave us and destroy our homes and kill our warriors. After all, you were not there to defend us, and we were helpless to fight them, like those of you who faced them." Seeing that his words were having the right effect on Rustam, the old man softened his tone. "By my faith, you are dearer to us than they, and if you will defend us, we will act as spies for you. Lo, we are the hapless ones of the Suwad, slaves to whoever conquers us." Rustam was silent for a little while. Then he observed quietly, "What the man says is true." A few more days passed. Then Jalinus advanced to Kharara, beyond Najaf and a few miles short of Qadisiyah, and Rustam crossed the Euphrates with the main body of the army to Najaf. Here again he had the nightmare about Umar sealing the weapons of the Persian soldiers. Rustam now moved cautiously, for he was within striking range of the main Muslim army. Jalinus with the advance guard marched and occupied Tiznabad, a village between Kharara and the Atiq. Bahman, commanding a large corps, moved up to Kharara, while Rustam moved with the main body to Selahun. Here the Persians waited a few days, watching the reaction of the Muslims, but there was no major move of Muslim forces from Qadisiyah. Next, Rustam put into effect the last phase of his move, which was a kind of advance to contact. Jalinus moved forward steadily until he reached the river Atiq and spread his advance guard along the river as far south as opposite Qudais, while at the same time posting a strong guard on the bridge, facing Zohra and the Muslim advance guard. Bahman advanced and occupied the last camp of Jalinus at Tiznab, and Rustam with the main body moved up to Kharara. It was a nicely conducted advance, as per textbook, and had taken the Persian army as far as it could go. The next step could only be taken as part of battle, for on the west bank of the Atiq stood the Muslim army. The Persians now deployed in camp with Jalinus committed along the Atiq front as a covering force. Bahman commanding a corps behind him, ready to rush into action in aid of Jalinus, should such a move become necessary, and Rustam with the main body of the army standing behind Bahman. Rustam had no intention of rushing into battle. He needed time to prepare for it. The Persian army had a strength of 60,000 men, and these were served by as many followers. It also had 33 war elephants. End of chapter 6.